Tonight's event is part of the Jepson School's year-long forum with the theme Leadership in a Democratic Society. Last semester we heard from 3 of this nation's most esteemed and thoughtful journalists on political leadership. We also heard from Dr. Frances Hesselbein, winner of the Presidential Medal of Freedom and director of the Drucker Institute for Nonprofit Management. And next month on March 23rd, you will all want to return to hear Nobel Peace Prize winner, arguably the most eloquent and respected critic of peace and democracy in Latin America, Dr. Oscar Arias, the former president of Costa Rica. That event will be March 23rd. As we formulated this year-long series on democracy, the faculty of the Jepson School were acutely aware that democracy's opportunities and effects have not been equally shared by all citizens of the United States. Indeed, only this century have the most basic form of political voice, the right to vote, been extended to women and guaranteed by law to people of color. Indeed, to what extent democracy and citizenship continue to be withheld from recent immigrants, migrant workers, Native Americans, and African Americans must be a central constitutive part of any adequate treatment of leadership in a democratic society. On these issues of race, diversity, inclusion, leadership, democracy, we could have found no more able, thoughtful, or inspiring thinker than Dr. Cornel West. Author of a dozen books, he is widely recognized as a leading public intellectual whose thought integrates the best of American pragmatism, Christian prophetic traditions of the Black Church, critical race theory, along with jazz, literature, and a host of other eclectic sources I dare not mention. As an organic intellectual, Dr. West utilizes all these traditions in order to understand and to act to overturn situations of injustice and despair. He is professor of Afro-American Studies and the philosophy of religion at Harvard University. On a personal note, I was able to serve as Dr. West's teaching assistant in 1995 during a semester when the Million Man March took place in Washington, D.C., and O.J. Simpson was acquitted from criminal charges. The racial polarization that always operates beneath the surface in our society had come into plain view for everyone. At that time, as now, Dr. West was and is still a national voice who articulated the depths and complexities of racial injustice, while he also struggled to build bridges of hope across chasms of division. Working with him was thus a personal and an intellectual highlight of my graduate career. This evening is a tremendous opportunity for all of us to work with him, to think with him, to grapple with him, intellectually and with our whole selves on issues of race, leadership, and democracy. Let us join together warmly then to welcome Dr. Cornel West.
God bless you. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very, very much. Indeed. Boy, it's more than a pleasure and delight for me to be here at University of Richmond. It is a privilege, honor, and a blessing. I'd like to thank my dear friend and brother and now Professor and Dr. Douglas Hicks. It's always good to see people moving and matriculating on. I remember him as a hungry, intellectually hungry graduate student. I was physically hungry too these days. But it's so good to set eyes on him, and similarly so for my very good friend and brother Dean John Rosenblum, who I knew when he was at University of Virginia, and we spent some time in South Africa, Bishop Desmond Tutu and a host of others just a few years ago. I've been blessed to meet my new sister and friend, Professor Gil Hickman, part of the Grand School of Leadership Studies, and similarly so for my friend and brother Professor Tom Wren and Terry Price and Dick Kuto. We had lunch at the Jefferson Hotel, I must say. I spoke in Roxbury a couple of nights ago and ended up at the Jefferson Hotel. There's a lot of modalities in life, but we kept our integrity. I'd like to thank Robert and Alice Jepson for their vision, their gift to establish the School of Leadership Studies. We would not be able to bring together the cast of such high-quality persons without that philanthropic gift. And it's always a pleasure to see my good friend and brother, Professor Scott Davis, who I knew at New York, and Professor John Spencer, who was a music and cultural critic in his own right, and last but not least, my old friend and brother, Professor Boykin Sanders, one of the finest biblical scholars of his generation, a friend of mine for 30 years now at that towering institution across the way at Virginia Union University, and I hope to get there very soon. I haven't been there in a while, actually. I see so many other friends, though. My God, I haven't seen my brother from Princeton in so very, very long. And I'm sure there's so many other friends here, but let me proceed. I stand before you tonight as a very small part of a great and grand tradition. It is a tradition of struggle for decency and dignity, struggle for freedom and democracy, that I decided a long time ago that I was going to live and die such that this particular tradition of struggle can remain vital and vibrant if others become a part of it and build on it. That no one of us are so indispensable, and yet all of us are necessary for the tradition of struggle to be strong into not just the 21st century, but the third millennium. And there's no guarantee. So when we think about race and leadership and democracy, all of these terms with of great weight and gravity, the question becomes, how do we situate ourselves in a set of stories bigger than us? How do we locate ourselves in a set of narratives grander than us? We know that traditions don't stay alive by means of osmosis. T.S. Eliot is right when he says tradition is not something you inherit. If you want it, you must obtain it with great labor. You've got to fight for it. And his sidekick, Ezra Pound, is also right, as he says in the 81st Cantos, what thou lovest well is thy heritage. What are your priorities? And any time we talk about race in America, anytime we talk about leadership in America, we're talking about priorities. Or on a deeper level, what kind of nation are we really? What kind of persons are we really? What kind of collectivity, what kind of social experiment are we really? And we define it in part based on the choices and commitments that we make. Now, I know it's Black History Month, and the great Carter Woodson understood that there ought to be a time in which we examine American society from the lens of those particular peoples who have been so thoroughly dehumanized but never accepted dehumanization as the last word. And I know it's the shortest month of the year. It's a little difficult to get America to wrestle with some of its legacies of the night, its underside, as it were. But it has everything to do, not just with race, it has everything to do with democracy, the future of American democracy, the prospects of the American Republic. Race is in no way some marginal, ghettoized issue. It is not additive, it is constitutive of American history and New World history and human history. It is by no means peripheral, it is integral to American history, New World history, human history. But it constitutes such a challenge. Anytime we talk about race in America, we're always forced to work through race to a whole host of other issues. Because peoples of color are disproportionately working people, so we must talk about class. The vast majority of people of color are sisters, women. We must talk about gender. We're not doing people a favor in some PC chit-chat-like style by just adding on. We're just trying to be truthful to the doings and the sufferings, successes and failures, the virtues and vices, the rights and wrongs of this particular slice of humanity. And when we think of those who came before, the most visible figures of this tradition of struggle, Harriet Tubman, makes you tremble. Ida B. Wells Barnett and Frederick Douglass, A. Philip Randolph and Marcus Garvey and Diane Nash and Robert Moses and Malcolm X. One cannot but be humbled. But to talk about race in America, even during the month of February, forces each and every one of us not to lose track of white brothers like John Brown. He's part of the history. White brothers like Miles Horton, the founder of Highlander Center, where Sister Rosa Parks and old brother Stokely Carmichael, we miss him so already. Feel his spirit. He was there at Highlander Center too, with Miles Horton. White sisters like Ann Braden. Red brothers like Russell Means are part of this tradition. And Asian sisters like Grace Boggs, fellow companion of James Boggs in a chocolate city named Detroit. She's still going. We miss Brother James. We could call the roll. Gay sisters like Audre Lorde and James Baldwin. Black culture inconceivable without such figures. Lesbian sisters like Adrienne Rich, they're part of the same tradition. This tradition has always said, whosoever will, let him or her come if they're willing to make certain moral choices, political commitments, and most importantly, if they're willing to pay a certain cost, bear a certain burden. And this tradition that I'm talking about is, in fact, a species of the democratic tradition. And I say species because we must always contextualize. And anytime you contextualize, you historicize. And anytime you historicize, you pluralize. There's always multiplicity, diversity, heterogeneity shot through all of these traditions with a variety of different voices and the versions of different ideals and principles. And when I say democratic tradition, I think it has something to do with everybody here. Because this tradition raises the most fundamental question of what it means to be human. Let us never forget that our English word human derives from the Latin humando, which means, and Vico in his New Science in paragraph 12 reminds us, it means burying. It's always nice to remind the professors of humanity who walk around feeling rather well that They're into the business of dealing with the dead, and the mass corpses and the coffins, the many thousands gone. And what is it about featherless, two-legged, linguistically conscious creatures born between urine and feces like us that we bury our dead often? Maybe we're most human when we stand before the coffin of our loved ones and thereby are forced to raise the most fundamental questions of what it means to be human. Why? Because we are relating ourselves to the dead, connecting the dimensions of time, of past and present, in order to project a future. I'm saying in part something profoundly un-American. I'm saying that a sense of history is a precondition for any serious talk about race and democracy. And to talk about history is to link human beings wrestling with the challenges of evil. I didn't say problem of evil. I don't know of a thoroughly convincing theodicy that can account for why it is that so many folk have had to catch so much hell for so long. I don't know why. Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor is sufficient for me. One innocent child cannot be the basis of some overarching cosmic justice. Just hush our mouths. We don't know why there's so many silent tears and weary lament and guttural cries and wrenching moans. Even as a Christian, I just hush my mouth. And if a preacher trots out some kind of overarching theoretical resolution of why there's so much suffering in the world, I'll say, you went to the wrong seminary. You think too highly of yourself. Your little finite mind can't wrap around this mystery and the magnitude of this mystery. What we have to deal with is the challenge of evil, the challenge of unjustified suffering in the world, the challenge of unnecessary social misery in the world, the challenge of undeserved harm, the challenge of gratuitous cruelty and intentional humiliation, evil at its depth. And to talk about race in America is to raise the issue of evil in America. And that's why it's impossible to raise the issue of race in America and be confined to race, because when you talk about evil, there's a variety of different forms of unjustified suffering in America's past and present. There's a variety of different forms of unnecessary social misery in our midst today. Anybody who has the audacity to view him or herself as a leader has to look America honestly in the face and say, how do I put forward a language that keeps track of evil in a nation that understands itself as a city on the hill that transcends history? Or is the moral exemplar of the modern world in such a way that it's the culmination of history? F.O. Matheson put it so well, the Harvard literary critic, the democratic socialist, the gay brother, the author of American Renaissance, the classic of 1941. He said, would America be unique among modern nations to move from perceived innocence to corruption without a mediating stage of maturity? Any discourse of innocence usually hides and conceals some kind of violence, hides and conceals some kind of night-like set of realities. Any discourse of innocence is rooted in a melodramatic conception of the world, with the pure heroes and the impure villains, a Manichaean view of the world. One side having a monopoly of good, truth, and beauty, the other side having hardly none at all. It's an infantile mentality, childish mentality, immature mentality. One of the reasons why Henry James, the great New England writer, ended up in England was because he said, you know, America's a hotel civilization. So I've got to go. I need something more complex, more complicated in order to generate the art that I want. There's something about the culture that's so thin and hollow and shadow and shoddy that these people are so preoccupied like folk in a hotel with comfort and convenience and contentment. They don't want to deal with the night, just like a hotel, lights on all the time. All the time. You leave your room, it's dirty, come back, it's clean, don't see who cleaned it. Don't know whether they're unionized, don't know whether they're being treated with dignity. All you know is your convenience has been satisfied. So quintessentially American. Romantic in the narrow sense. You see. And this is not a trashing of America. It's an attempt to wrestle with America. There's no way that you can trash America when you have the Melvilles and Morrisons and Tennessee Williams and the blues. That flies in the face of the sentimental, the melodramatic, the cheaply romantic, that wrestles with the tragic, the comic, the night side. America is a complex civilization. I think F. Scott Fitzgerald is right when he said the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in your mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. That's what we need. Can we keep track of both? You see, can we keep track of both? That's what it means in part, to have a democratic sensibility, to be so fallible, flexible, so protean, so improvisational that you keep track of the insights and separate it from the vulgar ideology and keep moving. It's very jazz-like, actually. Always moving but building, not dogmatic, rigid, or orthodox. That's the tradition that I'm talking about. But how do we talk about evil in America? Why is it that over and over again, the particular form of evil, like the vicious legacy of white supremacy, is difficult to wrestle with honestly, candidly? And usually we have to wait for a near catastrophe before many even acknowledge we might have a problem. It's incredible. U.S. Constitution, no reference to the institution of slavery. American denial, avoidance, evasion. 22% of the inhabitants, 13 colonies, enslaved African brothers and sisters. But somehow going to muddle through, going to skate above history. No, you're going to reap what you sow. The chickens will come home to roost. There's no escape from history. 1861, you all know the story in Richmond. I've always felt a little funny because Brother Jefferson Davis was born the same day I was. June the 2nd. I remember that when I was in 3rd grade. I said, Lord have mercy, what a mysterious world. But what we're talking about is the refusal of America to acknowledge the way in which white supremacy was like a serpent wrapped around the legs of the table on which the Declaration of Independence was signed by the Founding Fathers. It haunted America in 1776. It haunted America in 1861. It haunts America in 1999. But in 1861, with a union who had no fundamental intention of breaking the back of white supremacist slavery, but did want to preserve the union, and with a confederacy that said we care more to preserving our white supremacist way of life than any talk about democracy. Don't take us to be Democrats, small d. We have to make a choice. We're very clear about this. It's nice to have a little democracy on the side. But we are going to preserve this way of life. And of course, we're quite courageous in it. Held off to 22 states with just 9 states. 620,000 precious human beings dead as a result of the most barbaric war of the mid-19th century. More Union soldiers dead in the Civil War than all U.S. soldiers dead in World War II. Each life precious. That's how deep it cut. Over what? The inability to talk about this particular kind of evil. Race. And the ways in which the legacy of white supremacy contributes to the arrested development of democracy. And the question becomes, how serious are we really about our commitment to democracy, not simply of a government of, for, and by the people, but an acknowledgement of that most precious of democratic notions of citizenship, in which voices can be heard at the highest levels of those decision-making processes and institutions that guide and regulate our lives. As Du Bois put it so well in Black Reconstruction, the classic of 1935, he said there was deep democratic sensibilities among these victims of American democracy. You might recall that was Malcolm X's scientific definition of a nigger, a victim of American democracy, yet resisting. And it's true. What was the first line of the National Negro, the National Negro Anthem? It's a democratic cry, isn't it? Lift every voice. Right? Lack of democracy, voicelessness. Democracy, voices heard to help shape their destiny, to help guide their sense of self-determination as part of a democratic experiment. And we know the story. From 1865 to 1877, America embarks on an experiment unprecedented in human history to try to create a multiracial democracy. Never in the history of the world has there been such an immediate shift from slave status to citizen status. It was a major breakthrough, given all of its shortcomings. Major breakthrough. And of course, we had more black senators then than we do now. I was reminded of that on television a few weeks ago. I looked at the Senate. So, wow, this is the greatest legislative body in the late 20th century. Rehnquist, Thurman, Lott, Southern brothers. Themselves connected in a very complex way to the legacy of 1877, in which the Confederacy had already lost the war, but white supremacy would win the peace. And race would again, for the most part, go underground. America flexes its muscle industrially, politically, corporate power, workers coming from all parts of Europe, southern Italy, Eastern Europe, Ukraine, and others. Vast majority of black folk locked into institutional terrorism, Jim and Jane Crow Sr. We still got a lot of Jim Jane Crow Jr. around, but we're going to talk about that later on. Institutional terrorism, sharecropper, tenant farmer, day laborer, rights eroding, participation rendered more and more vacuous. Just at the time when America is stepping on the international stage to compete with imperial powers like Bismarck's Germany, Gladstone's England. And for every 2.5 days for 51 years, of course, some black man, a black woman, a black child hanging from some tree, the strange fruit the southern trees bear that Billie Holiday sang about. That peculiar American institution called lynching. Just the peak of the institutional terroristic system. We'd rather not talk about it. And it ought not to paralyze us, but we can't talk about race and democracy and be serious about our leadership if we don't speak our fallible truths and bear our imperfect witness about past and what we can do in the present to make the future better. It's difficult to talk honestly about race in America because it renders us not comfortable, but it creates discomfort. It's certainly not convenient. We'd rather be doing something else. But if you fundamentally believe that what's at stake is not just the destiny of peoples of color, specifically people of African descent, but the democracy itself, it behooves us to wrestle with it before we run into a wall of history. We'd have to wait till the 1960s before we had a serious wrestling with the legacy of white supremacy and the precious yet precarious experiment in democracy called America. And oftentimes, especially for young people, there's a sense that the 1960s was a moment in which Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer and others were leading marches, joined in very rich and heartfelt multiracial coalitions to try to bring power and pressure to bear on the American social system. And that is very true. We see it every January now when Brother Martin's trotted out, viewed as an icon, put on some pedestal rather than the wave in an ocean, which is part of a tradition of struggle. But the 1960s also was a moment in which there were 329 uprisings in 257 cities in 4.5 years, in which April 4th, 1968, the bullets ripped through the precious body of Brother Martin in Memphis. There were 213 uprisings within 24 hours. That's shaking the foundations of American civilization. And that story is more and more rarely told these days. People talk about the 60s. They usually talk about some white brother with long hair flying high in the friendly skies at Woodstock. Hedonism, narcissism, self-indulgence. Yeah, that went on too. They were up there. Or we think of mass demonstrations against the Vietnam War. Yeah, that was part of it too. But there was a struggle over what are we going to do about the legacy of white supremacy going on too. It was at the center of so much of the domestic strife in which white fears and anxieties were more and more fanned and fueled because of threats, perceived threats from these people. Will they treat us the way we have so often treated them? Are their hearts full of revenge like Hamlet? You see, balkanization reinforced. And the figure so fundamentally dedicated to enriching our notion of citizenship, building on the rich spiritual and cultural resources of black church traditions and American Christianity, being able to call for the kind of spiritual and moral awakening around public life that Martin had put forward. How rare that is in American history. Most attempts of religious thinkers to engage in awakenings and promote various kinds of renaissances and renaissance are deeply authoritarian and impose their values on others in such a way that it downplays public interest and common good. Martin said, no, I'm Democrat, small d, and Christian, capital C. It's very rare. You see. But once he was gone, it was clear that very, very deep rifts would be created and questions would be raised. Questions raised by Marcus Garvey, Elijah Muhammad, Minister Louis Farrakhan today. What makes us think that American civilization actually has the wherewithal, the deep intellectual, cultural, political, and economic resources to create a full-fledged multiracial democracy? What evidence do we really have? Maybe Alexis de Tocqueville is right in the last chapter of the first volume of Democracy in America. He said, I can't conceive of a multiracial democracy. I've been on the white side of town, white supremacist sensibilities shot through, cuts too deep. Been on the black side of town and suspicion is too deep. I can't conceive of them working together to constitute a full-fledged multiracial democracy. Thomas Jefferson reached the same conclusion. Abe Lincoln, most of his life, had reached the same conclusion. He changed his mind in his struggle over New Orleans that promoted the right of black people to vote. And as soon as he changed his mind, John Wilkes Booth, white supremacists, put the bullet in him. We'll never have a multiracial democracy. And Garvey and Elijah Muhammad, Minister Louis Farrakhan say what? Is it possible that the vast majority of white citizens in America can treat the vast majority of black folk equally as citizens and even kindly as human beings? That's not a frivolous question. Marcus Garvey concluded, as long as black folk are in America, the vast majority of them will live lives of ruin and disaster. Now, he said it might be the case that America has the capacity to create a black middle class, a black lumpen bourgeoisie beneath the American middle class, to bring them in, either assimilate or integrate or convince them that somehow they are so different from some of their cousins in the working class and working poor and very poor, but that's not the litmus test. The litmus test is the majority of poor and working poor who are rarely represented in the American media. Hard-working folk get up every morning, work more than 40 hours a week, do not receive 1 penny from the federal government, but still live in poverty, inculcate, instill the Protestant work ethic, frugal, thrifty, deferring gratification, trying to keep the connection with the kids, but still locked in. That's the ones to keep track of as litmus tests. And in talking about race and democracy, we must take seriously the black nationalist tradition that poses these questions, even if we disagree with the conclusions. Brother Martin Luther King Jr. in his 7-hour meeting with Elijah Muhammad had reached the conclusion, yes, there is a Garveyite skeleton in my closet, because I haven't met the test. You see, he could see the black middle class growing, the class divisions. I think if he were around, he'd probably be able to see the patriarchy and the homophobia tightening up and losing sight of the humanity of women and gay brothers and lesbian sisters. He said, but that's not what democracy is about. Democracy is about everyday people of all colors having access to lives of decency and dignity, you see. And that's why, for me, it's very frightening in a way to even talk about race and democracy in 1999, not because the progress that has been made needs to be downplayed. The progress is certainly real, owing to the fact that so many people sacrifice so much. The breakthroughs certainly have been made, but they're relative breakthroughs. And Brother Malcolm X always reminded us, you don't stab a man in the back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches and say you're making progress. That's not the moment to start celebrating, patting yourself on the back, and so on. For me, in 1999, courageous, visionary leadership in American democracy must highlight three fundamental issues. It has everything to do with race, but it also transcends race. And by transcends, I don't mean jettison and push aside. I mean works through. You have to work through race to transcend race. The first issue is that of increasing and galloping wealth inequality. There must be a robust, uninhibited public conversation about wealth equality in the United States. It's hardly taking place. 1% of the population own 39% of the wealth. It sounds oligarchic, plutocratic, to some degree pigmentocratic. The next 9% own another 37%, and this is from Edward Wolff, highly distinguished and well-respected economist at NYU, in a book called Top Heavy, appropriately titled, A Study of Increasing Wealth Inequality. In 1979, 1% of the population owned 22% of the wealth. How much wealth inequality can American democracy take before its body politic is thoroughly shattered with class strife, open and often ugly, spills over beyond constitutional procedures, frightening, crypto-fascist possibilities. Corporate profit since 1980 up 200%. CEO salaries since 1980 up 400%. CEO salaries of the Fortune 500 companies up 925%. And yet 80% of America's labor force, productive, non-supervisory workers dealing with decline in real inflation-adjusted wages. How do you deal with unbelievable increases in profits and yet wages over 25 years slightly declining? That was not the case between 1945 and 1973 when America constituted a mass middle class owing to an unprecedented economic boom. With working peoples actually able to gain access to wages increasing as profits went up. How do we talk about this? I think it has something to do with corporate and managerial greed. But when I say that, of course, I've got to say that Christianly. What I mean by that is that I know there's greed in me. And so the question is, what kind of mechanisms of accountability ought to be in place so when people have an opportunity to gain access to such large amounts of wealth that they recognize that there's some public responsibility to ensure that the boat stays afloat. And yet there's no serious talk about this at all. 20% of all Americans' children live in poverty. 47% of brown children live in poverty. 49% of black children live in poverty in the richest nation in the history of the world. That's a disgrace. It's only 2% in Denmark, 4% in Norway. Even Germany, not known for a country of great social generosity in this barbaric century, only have 9% of their children living in poverty. What's the problem, America? Children, 100% of the future. They can't take responsibility for their situation. What's going on? Why is it that working people's power is so weak and feeble, that they're working 163 more hours now than they were in 1979 in order to keep the family wage going, with women moving into the labor force in the last 25 years with a level of unprecedented rapidity in order to keep the family wage afloat? 6 million moms and dads work 4 jobs between them in America in order to support their children. What's going on? Why not at least a public discussion about it? And yes, black and brown and red are disproportionately white, but the vast majority Working people are white brothers and sisters. And yet there's no serious discussion even among many of them, as they are convinced that it's the most vulnerable who are responsible for their situation. Right? Feeling economic insecurity on the job, you don't courageously confront the boss, you cowardly confront the most vulnerable. Must be that affirmative action, those black folk taking my spot. Keep track of those immigrants. We don't want too many of them gaining access to the country. They take my spot. He said, well, how many black folk in your workforce? Well, it's about 3 of them so far. Wow, they really taking over, aren't they? Ooh. Senior management. How many of you guys are senior management? I know they really taking over up there. You see. Maybe we ought to push the women back into the kitchen. Make space for the men. You see. When's the last time you had a job? Well, it's been a while. How you making it? Well, I got my girlfriend. What's she doing? She working. Uh-huh. Yeah, see. Or blame it on the gay lesbian brothers. 6% of the population thinking about stepping out of the closet. The whole civilization collapses. Yeah, boy, that's a sophisticated explanation of what's going on. Human, all too human to want to scapegoat the most vulnerable when one's wrestling with anxiety and insecurity on the workplace and in one's life. Where's the courageous leadership to say, let us look at this larger context, domestic and global? 225 individuals in 1998 have more wealth than the bottom 47% of all of humankind on the globe. What are they going to say about us 100 years from now? We often point the finger at slaveholders. How could they have slaves? How immoral they were. What are they going to say about us and the various forms of social misery that we often don't want to talk about? What a challenge. Second challenge for leadership, linked to race but also going beyond it, has everything to do with the future of American democracy. And that is the impact of our highly crystallized market culture that evolves around buying and selling and promoting and advertising, that tries to convince us that to be human is not to suffer and shudder and struggle, which for me represents the best of traditions wrestling with what it means to be human. No, to be human in market culture is to be stimulated and titillated, primarily by means of consumption. So you're feeling down and want to wrestle with the darkness? No, you just go to the mall and consume and feel better about yourself with money you don't have. Credit card maybe you ought not have. Just fetishize those commodities. Ascribe magical powers to them that will make you feel so good. I experience this all the time when I go in the bookstores. Oh, I'm feeling down. My brother knows. I'm feeling down and out. Run to the bookstore and buy 7 books and know I only got time to read 1 in the next 3 days, but I feel so much better about myself. Get my Rochelle Farrell CD. I'm feeling so good. There's nothing wrong with consumption when it is connected to something bigger than it. That has to do with holding off all forms of idolatry and fetishizing. Of course, we need to consume in order to survive. But in a market culture, it's an attempt to dissemble our souls and reassemble our souls in such a way that we feel we're alive only when we're titillated and stimulated, with devastating impact on young people. Devastating impact on young people, you see. And of course, a market culture erases and elides the past. It's preoccupied solely with the present. You see. Short-term thinking, Wall Street, in our own lives. White House, State House, City Hall. Next election, benchmark a criteria for reflection about public interest. not the longevity of the democratic experiment, just the next election. Market culture produces a market morality, hedonistic, narcissistic, egoistic, I'm at the center of the universe. Again, childish rather than childlike. That's what's so wonderful about a child. It comes out of the womb crying for help. There's a certain honesty about that. The cry for help sits at the center of all of our lives. But at the same time, that child assumes that any time they cry, somebody really ought to respond. Quick, because they are the center of the universe. A market morality produces a market mentality. I want pleasure now, power now, property now. Got a little technology to reinforce the point. I want your property now. It's cold-hearted, mean-spirited. Not just with the potential criminal, but it's shot through our institutions. Obsessed with the 11th commandment, thou shalt not get caught. Just get over by any means necessary. It's not what Malcolm had in mind. Just get over. And it reinforces what? The distrust, the suspicion. And the flip side of sentimentalism is cynicism. You see, if you're sentimental and disappointed, you become cynical. The sense in which there are two sides of the same coin. And we live now in a deeply cynical age. Again, disproportionately, one could argue at work among young people because they have very little exposure to the non-market side of things, the non-market values like love, care, and service to something bigger than them. Non-market activity. One of the reasons why Sister Sylvia Ann Hewlett and I wrote a book on war against parents, because we're thoroughly convinced parenting is the ultimate non-market activity in a market culture. Caring, loving, sacrificing against the grain. And of course, the benefits of parenting have been socialized. Society gets that wonderful child who's been shaped and molded in a certain way. And the costs have been privatized. That you have to bear all the costs for the most part. Putting out the money, the time, and so forth, and get that wonderful kiss at graduation. And it's worth it anyway, but you're cutting against the grain in the market culture. And we see it, of course, so often in the betrayals of parents, from Married with Children to Home Alone to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. What happens when you degrade and demean non-market activity? Parenting is simply one version of it. And what has been the major response of young folk to try to keep alive a spirit of resistance in a moment in which wealth inequality is increasing and the market culture is seeping through the hearts and minds and souls of all of us? It's been hip-hop culture, rap music. It's an extension in many ways of the very rich black musical tradition that has always had a very special role in the lives of black people of preserving sanity and humanity as one deals with the absurdity of a racist society. Being soulful, the sharing of soothing sweetness, or the sweet indictment of misery that constitutes the blues. Rap music builds on this tradition. Tremendous linguistic virtuosity, creativity, imagination, intelligence, wrestling with the market. But something else is going on too, and this is one of the reasons why rap music transcends the black community, though it flowed primarily out of the black and Jamaican communities. And that is that it constitutes an indictment of the older generation that has not spent enough time and given enough love and care and nurture to young folk. So they say, we have to raise ourselves. We've got to teach each other how to grow up. We've got to give advice and counsel to each other. We'll constitute our own black CNN, our own lines of communication, because we're not receiving this guidance from an older generation. This is not just in black America. This is true in the country. with divorce rates roughly the same in vanilla suburbs and chocolate cities, one of the things they share in common. And more of the children lonely, sad, rootless, deracinated, drifting, wondering how to connect, oftentimes wondering whether they even can master the art of intimacy. It reminds us of the American Hamlet of Blanche Dubois in the streetcar named Desire by Tennessee Williams, and her quest, her sad failure in her quest for intimacy. And in the end, she has to do what? What so many young people have to do, depend on the kindness of strangers. Can you titillate me and I titillate you, freak me and freak you? Ask what the performance level is from 0 to 10 after, and I'll check and see whether I'll be back next week or find somebody else for the titillation. What an empty life. Spiritual malnutrition. Never able, just like Sister Blanche, to confront a past, her disgusted Alan Gray, and to confront a present, the relationship between Stella and old Stanley Kowalski. I won't go into all the play, but y'all know the play. Please wrestle with it, because it's talking about contemporary America too. When non-market values like kindness and sweetness and gentleness and tenderness are pushed to the margins, you do in fact end up with a culture in which to reach any qualitative level of intimacy is more and more difficult. And what does that do? It renders people even more cold-hearted and mean-spirited in their personal relations as well as in the society at large. And this is what I mean by very frightening, because it is impossible to sustain a tradition of struggle, a radically democratic tradition of struggle, without non-market values playing a fundamental role. The ultimate logic of a market culture is the gangsterization of culture, with gangster mentality. We see it in capitalist Russia this very moment. Markets unfettered, unedited, unregulated, weak nation state, feeble civil society, weak rule of law, run more and more by mafioso, militia, gangsters. It's frightening. It's not allowed to talk about capitalist Russia. We got a whole lot of discourse on communist Russia and all the suffering of Russian brothers and sisters, and we ought. And they were suffering the violation of rights and liberties, the repression and regimentation of their population. Yes. But not a whole lot of talk about capitalist Russia. Why? Because now they've got an economic system just like ours. It's capitalism. But it's crony capitalism. And the question becomes, how crony is our capitalism getting? So unfettered, so unedited, it is very difficult to even talk about democratic countervailing forces, democratic practices, citizens believing they can make a difference by organizing, mobilizing, voting. Instead, we get cynicism, apathy, complacency. I'll get mine, you get yours. Are you going to organize? No, I'm not even going to vote. Why? Because it's Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Cold-hearted, mean-spirited Republican Party, spineless, milquetoast Democratic Party. I don't have nothing to vote for. Give me a drink. And yet we know it does make a difference, but it's not a grand choice to make. I don't know of too many people who really feel fired up after they vote. It's kind of a civic duty, like taking aspirin. And we ought to vote, yes. No doubt. But with that increasing wealth inequality and the highly crystallized market culture, two fundamental challenges for leadership, 1999, we must hit head on. The third, impoverished public life. By impoverished public life, I mean the public spaces that each one of us enter without humiliation as citizens, and entering that space feeling that we can engage in conversation, in organization, with mutual respect of one another, agree to disagree. And it's hard to find that these days. Very hard. Democratic discourse is not about reaching unanimity. It's about reaching relative agreements, operational unity, political disagreement, ideological clash, but still within the context of public spaces. Most public conversation in America today, name-calling, finger-pointing, pigeonholing. And this is true not simply across race, this is true within each community. You look at the discourse of Jewish brothers and sisters at each other's throats. Orthodox, Reform, conservative, right wing, moderate, left wing. Look in the context, black community, at each other's throats. Don't even have to worry about it being multiracial. You can just have an intra-black dialogue and might have to call in the police. Why? Not enough respect to one another. Not enough love of one another. Not enough patience with one another. Anytime you find a relative dialogue in the culture as a whole, you can bet your bottom dollar you're going to have relative dialogue within the various communities themselves. That's how democracy works. It begins to look as if it's running out of gas. And without the ability to communicate publicly, you can't even attempt to reach any understanding of the overwhelming public issues and problems. What then are we to do? You can imagine, sense of history is no overnight panacea. I don't believe in them. I don't believe there's a master plan or some messianic man with the master plan. That's about as anti-democratic as you can get, especially one that got some special connection to God. Speaks only, regularly, religiously to that leader. They have a role to play in the conversation because everyone has a right to their tradition, religious, non-tradition, whatever. But one voice among others. Organizational voice, one voice among others. First and foremost, we need to simply have a candid acknowledgement of the ways in which we are in deep trouble, because we live in a moment in which we're told over and over again that this is a golden age, strong economy, the last empire of the 20th century, stable. And I do not believe it. Each chocolate city is a ticking time bomb tonight. It just hasn't erupted. Almost did in New York. We were just there just a few days ago with Brother Diallo. Shot 41 times. Luckily, it didn't spill over again like Rodney King. If it did, and all of a sudden we have a problem, town meeting, Ted Koppel comes in, dialogue's on. No, we are citizens concerned with the future of American democracy. We want to have a dialogue now so we have some means by which we can wrestle with these issues, because we know it's going to spill over sooner or later. We're not going to wait for some near catastrophe. But how do you do that? Well, partly is you continually attempt to acknowledge certain truths that are being hidden and concealed at present. That's the best of black history, the best of the tradition of struggle, you see. You enter the dialogue self-critically, not in the spirit of self-righteousness, you see. And you recognize what is at stake. Not just the lives of the children, but your own ability to live a life not only with your own conscience, you see, but even more importantly, with the subversive memory of those who came before and the depths of their sacrifice, such that we can even live at the level of relative prosperity, of grandmothers and grandfathers and fathers and mothers and uncles and aunts who didn't live to see the day in which so many Americans could actually try to create a multiracial democracy. And for me personally, grandmothers and grandfathers who knew intimately the worst of America, its terroristic side, you see, could say, please don't forget me even as you are seduced by the felicities of bourgeois existence. Don't forget me. Don't forget what I did. Don't forget my struggle. Don't forget my sacrifice. And once you lose connection with that kind of memory, one becomes a kind of consumer-driven automaton. You see. And in some ways, that's the death of the best of America, even as America limps through the 21st century. And I'm thoroughly convinced that young people, courageous, visionary ones, can generate new ways of leadership. And I look more and more to young people, not because they have any monopoly on courage, but rather because there's a hunger and a thirst in the market culture that has shaped them such that they're looking for something more than just that material toy. We see it nowadays in our market Christianity. Young people want more than just market Christianity and gospels of health and wealth and how to keep gas in your tank as you become part of the rat race. That's one reason why they don't go to church that much anymore. That's a sign of critique. Oh, this is Christianity, it's just market Christianity, and the blood has become Kool-Aid, and prayer is, let's make a deal with God. I got another hustle. I don't need that one. That's a hunger. Who can speak to that hunger? Or will it spill over in a negative way? Self-destruction, self-violation. Same is true in market education. We see it in the universities. University of Richmond, Berkeley, Harvard, Virginia Union, Virginia Commonwealth. We want more than just a market education. Of course, we want that skill to gain access to that dynamite job, to live in that suburb and live relatively large, but we want something else. We want some critical consciousness. We want critical sensibility. We want a sense of what it means to be a citizen in American democracy. We don't want just the market education. But how do we do it? Open question. Challenge for staff, faculty, curriculum. We want more than just the same old voices we've heard all the time. We want broader voices. We know that any institution of higher learning concerned with the quest for truth and knowledge has to acknowledge the ways in which there's been a variety of voices involved in the quest for truth and knowledge. No culture has a monopoly on truth and knowledge, let's be honest. It's young folk, more and more, building on the struggles of the 60s. And this is certainly true, I think, in the culture. Tupac wanted more. He was caught in it, but he wanted more. You could tease it out through his tears. And in so many ways, he's a symbol, not just for black youth, but for youth around the country. They want more. And I simply say to young people here at University of Richmond, really do want more. That like those who came before, in the 40s, who had to push back the evils of Nazism. In 1942, there were 2 democracies in the whole world. Not clear that democracy would even last in the 20th century. But they had courage. They broke the back of Nazism. In the 1960s, they had to break the back of American apartheid. They did it. America was not going to survive with Jim Crow in place. Possible another civil war. They broke the back. Thank God for those cross-color. They did it. Can the younger generation hit wealth inequality, hit the desiccated market culture, hit impoverished public life with the help of some of us older folk who are fundamentally committed to the notion that no matter what the present situation is, we are going to attempt to meet the challenge, that we are going to go down fighting, because this democratic tradition of struggle is too rich to be diluted. And at the same time, the struggles against white supremacy and male supremacy and vast economic inequality and ecological abuse and homophobia, right, becomes a precondition for any healthy democracy in the 21st century. There is no guarantee. We could be experiencing the first moments of the dissolution and decomposition of American civilization. Civilizations come and go, you know. There once was a Roman Empire. There once was a British Empire. They come and go. But in the short time that we're here, we attempt to do the best that we can do and then pass the mantle on, keeping track of this rich, multi-voice, multiracial, democratic tradition. Thank you all so very much, and stay strong in your work. Thank you very much. Very kind. God bless you. Thank you very much. Thank you so very much. Sure, we got good time for questions, queries, comments, and so forth. Please don't hesitate. I know it's a little crowded and a little hot here. I was in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. It was minus 25. And here in Richmond, Virginia, you've actually got some warmth and heat. It's unbelievable. Yes, question.
Dr. West,
Yes.
in the spirit of optimism, would you speak to us about the Obsidian?
Oh, yes, the Obsidian Society founded by Brother Kelvin Seeley. No, I appreciate that. And it's so good to see you, very much so. We had a wonderful time. Was it 100 black women? That was Bell Hooks and I back in 1991, though. Very much so. Yeah, Obsidian Society is an idea of Kelvin Seeley, who was a young friend and some way student of mine, though I'm as much a student of his as he is of mine. And what he wanted to do was to put out a text, Restoring Hope, and a variety of other projects to make monies and the profits for these projects going into various activities, including, for example, giving out Genius Awards to young people who are in the arts as well as the sciences, putting a stress on discipline. I mean, one of the effects of the market culture on young people, of course, in trying to get over quickly is it downplays the discipline necessary in order to do a job well. And this is true educationally, artistically, and so on. So that certain quests for excellence may be downplayed and ignored. Why? Because it's so easy to make it. You don't have to be excellent to make it. You just make it no matter what, you see. And so we were trying to counter some of that with money making, using the market for non-market ends, because the market's here to stay. And of course, I didn't talk too much tonight about the virtues of the market, but it does have some. We don't have any other mechanisms to deal with price levels and what have you for mass heterogeneous populations. The attempt to eliminate markets usually leads to repression, violation of rights and liberty. So the question becomes, what are the conditions under which markets operate? Ideals of justice, fair regulation to ensure fair competition, and so forth and so on, you see. Efficiency is very important values, but when it trumps other values, it's dangerous, you see. Technological innovation, so crucial. But technological innovation alongside what? Accessibility to the technology and the larger social circumstances under which technology is used and deployed. Because all of these are human constructs. So we often forget that markets are legal constructions and human creations. We didn't have a corporation in America until 1886 with the courts. We made it a fiction. It's in Santa Clara. Made it a fiction, right? It's a human creation, and anything created by fallen, foible, wonderful, horrible human beings like us can be good and bad. Depends on how we use it. You see, depends on how we use it. So that's one effort that we've been doing, and it's going very, very well, actually. Right. Well, in the last page of the book, Brother Kelvin's got his. This is Restoring Hope. Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that. Oh, you really allowing me to advertise here, aren't you? But it's in Restoring Hope. That last page, he has a web page and so forth in order for people to make contact with him. And he's, for the most part, spending time on this. I mean, he's the young person who's heading this. And I think it's part of what so many adults are doing these days, recognizing that we've got to mentor, bond with, wrestle with young people. Across the board, too much disrespect. Young for old, old for young. There has to be some bridging of this generational gap for the country as well as for respective communities. Yeah, it's a question. Yes, thank you.
Dr. West, Ben Flowers, senior at Virginia University.
Good to see you.
They often say that on Sundays is the most segregated time in America. And dealing with the issue of race, how do you see the church in the 21st century?
Well, that's a good question. No, and I mean, the church across the board, or the church in respective communities and so on.
Across the board.
Yeah, it's across the board. Yeah, well, I appreciate that question. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a painful question for me as a Christian, you see, because so much of America has become, American Christianity has become post-resurrection Christianity, because the attempt to always want to identify with winners is an attempt to want to leapfrog over Friday and get to Easter Sunday without the crucifixion. You see. I mean, you can see that on the Easter week in so many of our churches. You can drive around on Thursday and they got the sign out, "He is risen." He hadn't even been crucified yet. You say, no. You don't go down with him, you can't come up with him. You see what I mean? You don't know what it's like to be bruised, wound, wrestling with those wounds, and still muster the power to love your way through the darkness of the world, which is what Calvary is about, then you'll never understand struggle. And you will fundamentally think that Jesus is the answer because he's a source of comfort that doesn't give you the strength to climb the mountain, just moves the mountain and gives you a helicopter to get over. No, it's not like that. See what I mean? It's not like that. And this is true in the market Christianity that has become hegemonic and pervasive in American life. And in some cases, it has become a hustle. No doubt about that. And it means then that the association of the rich Christian gospel with the thin, impoverished market Christianity doesn't allow the blood to really come pumping out. It's healing and saving power, you see, because it's something to dip in rather than be immersed in. That's why I call it Kool-Aid rather than blood. And you got a lot of Kool-Aid flowing at the cross of some of these churches these days. Just real thin and
Real thin.
you know, just put your toe in and don't get your suit wet and all that kind of thing. You're supposed to get all the way down. And when you come out, you know it's just not your power. Something greater has to be going on. Nobody has the power to love in a cruel world by yourself. That's what the gospel's about. Nobody has that power. You got to have something else, you see. But you don't get that power with the Kool-Aid, you see. And so what happens? Well, it becomes ossified and petrified. Now, we know this is a perennial struggle because no one's perfect. All of us are falling short. But that sense of struggle is then no longer associated more and more with the churches, you see. And of course, we're getting a variety of religious expressions, too. Both in the black community, Islamic brothers and sisters are growing, and they will continue to grow. Orthodox versions, Nation of Islam, and so on, you see. Buddhists, like my dear sister Bell Hooks, they are growing. People are hungry, looking around, New Age spiritualities and what have you, you see. So that I do believe that there's a future for, you know, prophetic wing of black churches. I believe there's a future for prophetic wing of churches in general in America. And that same is true for Judaism and Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism and what have you. But like so much of the culture, it is just being pushed against the wall. Pushed against the wall. I mean, it's so difficult for a young pastor, for example. I've always been blessed that I've never been called to preach. You know, it's true. It's a real mark of divine wisdom. But I think the predicament of a young pastor who has to, on the one hand, be preoccupied with managerial models and market models and quantity, the number of persons in congregation, and they more and more are becoming the benchmark of what we understand a successful church to be. And the issue of the quality of life lived, the quality of the ritual, the quality of the service, the quality of the community is downplayed. And we see it right across the board. I mean, you know, we won't go on into this, but even in our young people these days, I mean, when we have giants like Sarah Vaughan, John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk, Carla McRae, Aretha Franklin, Luther Vandross, genius like Curtis Mayfield, and you say, well, what has happened to our apprenticeship networks in music? So it's become so dependent on technology that many of the young folk can't even play the instrument. They don't need to play. Now, some of that is the circumstance in which they find themselves. So many of these educational systems, so decrepit, put such little value on those minds in those chocolate cities that they cut out the music program. So 2:30, they just drift. See what I mean? When I was growing up, we had the instruments right there. Somebody did it. And of course, anytime you're in a mentoring relation, not just about the music, it's about life. This is how to blow and live. Same time. You know what I mean? Right. Now, when you blow this love song, let me tell you something about what it means to fall in love. Well, serious lesson. See what I mean? That connection. Same is true in our athletic networks. They're breaking down too as the market moves in. Colleges, market-driven in athletics, just exploiting black bodies and white bodies and so forth, still not paying them nothing. In college, before they get to pros and so on. So that, I mean, these are things that need to be not just talked about, but organized around. Film is the same way, too. Look at, I mentioned before, the vicious stereotypes, not just by mainstream white filmmakers, black filmmakers who think they can make that big money by reinforcing the vicious stereotypes that then cultivate a young population. And then the young population won't even go see a serious movie about black life. They won't even go see it. You know what I mean? You can get some of the most towering, Jarima and a whole host of others, Charles Burnett, make these deep films, and you can just put it out for free, and people still won't see it. They want to see booty calls. Not all of them, because you can't never talk about all young people. No, many of them cutting against the grain. I want to make that point. But this is a major problem. And this is why, again, it has everything to do with race. It goes far beyond race. And of course, so many young people are racialized anyway. It's impossible to be a white young brother and sister and not to have a black dimension to your identity. In terms of how you walk, talk, music you listen to. That's how intertwined our destinies culturally and politically are. Yeah, but I'm sorry to go on and on, but I appreciate that. Yes, go right ahead. Mm-hmm.
Hello.
How you doing, nigga?
I'm fine, thank you. I wanted to first say that I became aware of these problems early on, but I was raised a Muslim. But aside from that, about a year and a half ago, I became familiar with Dr. Claude Anderson and how he explained the contract with America, and also other books that he had recommended, Ripken, The End of Work, and you know, how things are going to progress within the next 10, 15, 20 years. I became very concerned about that. I wanted to know what your views were on that insofar as how he explained how we could, as African Americans, remedy our situation a little bit by coming together on an economic base. I wanted to get your ideas on that, and also your ideas on Dr. Claude Anderson himself.
No, I appreciate that. Deep, one could go on and on. Let me just say a quick word, though, that I think is absolutely on target in terms of the central role of economic empowerment. The question becomes what particular forms and conditions under which it takes place. I think one of the reasons why it's so very important to talk about respect, self-love, self-regard, is because that's the kind of bonding necessary to create economic enterprises.
Okay, let me ask you this.
Yes.
I also teach school, substitute teacher in the city. And
right. At which level you teach, though?
Excuse me?
At which level?
Sixth grade.
Sixth grade.
Sixth and seventh grade. And they have some real issues. I mean, seriously. I mean, I don't
no
mean
doubt
no harm.
about that.
But they have issues that I'm not that much older than they are, you know, really. But they have issues that even and I was raised in the Bronx, New York, even that I didn't even come in contact with. And I came in contact with a lot of situations and issues.
Mm-hmm.
But their issues go even deeper than that. And, I mean, it's critical. I mean, I think that a lot of African Americans and a lot of people on a whole don't realize how critical the situation is and how necessary it is that something be done immediately. I mean, something has to be done soon, because these kids, like you say, they are really, it manifests itself every day. You can see how they hate one another just on a, you know, it's a real problem.
And the disrespect that I was talking
oh
before
my
of one
goodness.
another.
Disrespect, oh my goodness.
Yeah,
I can't even begin to even explain how disrespectful.
But then we raise the
it
question,
is.
now where does that come from? You see,
Well,
very
when
interesting
you made the point about the parents not doing and being, I think that is the problem right there. The parents not being able to do and not being able to be. And also in the African American community, it bothers me that strong African American males do not stand up. They won't even go talk to the brother on the corner. You know what I'm saying? They scared for some reason. And I think, and I've seen this ever since I grew up in Harlem, ever since I grew up in every black community I've ever been in. There's a black church on every corner. If it's not one on this side of the street, it's one on the opposite side of the street on that corner. And I don't understand how they can be a church on every corner and the community is in shambles. I don't understand that. And a man cannot go out and talk to a young brother scared of a young brother. I can't understand that.
No,
I just
hear
don't
you.
understand.
I hear
Something
you.
got to be
I
done.
hear you. Yeah, definitely. No, I hear you. You see, I think when we actually look at the young people, like the sixth graders, the precious sixth graders who you teach, and I applaud you for teaching and bonding and cherishing them. One is that usually when you find the worst among young people, they are emulating and imitating some adult.
That's correct.
You see, so adults are always already part of the problem, part of the solution.
That's correct.
Because young people didn't learn it by themselves. They must take responsibility, you know, at a certain age, but they didn't learn it by themselves. Secondly, the larger mass media that we were talking about, that just bombards them with the violent, self-indulgent pleasure and so forth and so on, you see. That also shapes them. And of course, those are adults too, that actually are teaching young people certain ways of being in the world as desirable. That's right. And thirdly, of course, there's peer group pressure. So that one could be the most loving, caring, sacrificial parent in the world. But your child get hooked up with the wrong group, and you can be in a world of trouble. When I say wrong group, I'm talking about those involved in injurious harm and so forth and so on, you see. So that no one of us are in full control. We make a difference. Parents do matter, no doubt about that. But
Well,
no parents is in full control because, again, there's larger structural and institutional circumstances.
That's correct.
Yes.
I understand that we are a society of human beings, and that's what makes it so important.
Dependent on one another.
That's right, society of human
Absolutely
beings.
right.
And I just wanted to make
But
the
I know
same
we better move on, though, sister.
I wanted to make the same point that you made, that it's not all children, just some children.
That's exactly, and I appreciate that too,
Thank
because
you.
we have to acknowledge that young people are in no way monolithic, and in fact, so much of the best in the black community actually is operating in the hearts and minds and souls of the young black folk, and that's true for young people as a whole. Yes, go right ahead. How you doing?
Good evening, Dr. West. How are you?
Good to see you.
All right. I have a question. You talked this evening about the discomfort that comes with any type of frank racial dialogue, whether it's in small groups or in big settings. I want to know this evening what your feelings are concerning the Clinton administration's attempts to bring racial dialogue out into the open through the creation of the commission, the subsequent report, and anything that's going on since that time, what your feelings are on that.
No, I appreciate the question. I mean, one, we have to draw a distinction between dialogue and chit-chat, as I mentioned before. You see what I mean? And this is very important. It's very important. If you've already set up your budget with your priorities put forward, and therefore talking about race will not inform those priorities, you're not really calling for dialogue. Now, nothing wrong with chit-chat. I mean, you know, life is full of a lot of different things. And you can have a chit-chat about race. People can wrestle with how you talk about reconciliation, justice, wrestle with their own prejudices and so on. But there's not dialogue in the deepest sense. Dialogue is about transformative possibilities in light of prevailing priorities. And therefore, there can be shifts in priority, you see. But we know that in relationships. You know what I mean? Your loved one wants to sit down and have a dialogue. You start trembling. Because you know it's going to be different when you get up than what it was when you sat down. It's like Nora, when Nora sits the brother down in a doll's house. What's his name? Helmut. Let's have a dialogue. He knows he's in trouble. Chit-chat, something else. Oh, how did it go today, honey? The kids doing all right? Yeah, blah, 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 blah. Everything just keeps moving on the surface. You see what I mean? So I support the effort, but it didn't have enough substance. And I have tremendous respect for the towering figure of John Hope Franklin, Professor Doctor. He's a living treasure. And one of the reasons why I spent as much time is really because of him, because I have such trust in his integrity. And he knew he was cutting against the grain. And what is he, 84 years old? I mean, it's unbelievable in terms of the sacrifice that he made to be a part of that. But in the end, I think we still have a long way to go. I think the commission is still a good thing to have around. And Chris Edley and the president has written a book now on race, coming out fairly soon now that the Monica Lewinsky thing looks as if it's going to be over. So we shall see. We shall see. Yes, go right ahead, though. Yeah, we'll go a little bit longer, but yeah. No, I appreciate it. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, no, Brother Doug understand. Yeah, go right ahead. Okay.
Well, earlier today you asked us to, some of the students to rip into some of your ideas, so I'm gonna do that. You talk in your book, and you talk tonight about black leadership.
Yes.
It seems that your definition of leadership and what we preach at the Jepson School is not on scale. I mean, it's similar. Jepson School, we have a theory or some theory, what I believe in, is that the followership is just as important, if not more important, than the actual leader. So it's important to mention the leaders you brought up, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. In today's society, I think the followership is even more important, because I think you can always find the handful of strong people to get up and preach. Now, if the problem in black society today is that especially black youth are so overburdened with the problems of inner city problems and such, how are they going to have the time to be an active followership, which is so important to the leadership process?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, though, brother. You're hitting a whole host of nails on the head. One is that I talk primarily about the content and substance of leadership. I didn't say too much about the composition of leadership. I did mention very briefly, I just tapped the messianic model of leadership. You recall that moment in the presentation?
Yeah.
So that you give you a sense that I'm very suspicious of man with the master plan, the messianic model, the Pied Piper that asks for blind faith followers, you see. I think that Brother Ron Daniels, my good friend who's head of the Center of Constitutional Rights, he used to say, we ought not look for a leader, we are the leaders we have been looking for. And what he means by that is an empowerment of each and every one of us to cultivate gifts, talents, and so forth. Here I think I'm a bit closer to both you and the Jepson School. But I also recognize that even given the variety of different talents and gifts, we're still going to perform different roles and functions. I believe in rotation of leadership, but there are moments in which there's certain spokespersons for a group, others are doing other kinds of things. They all are exercising various kinds of leadership. Now, in the black community, of course, this becomes a crucial problem for two reasons. One is that historically, one of the ways in which you control a group who you think constitute a threat to you is to ensure that there's only one head Negro in charge who you can then work with, either control or compromise. Or if they get too radical, cut their neck off. See what I mean? Yeah. And that's precisely the model I think that needs to be called into question. But the flip side of it is that in America, in which police brutality, a criminal justice system that is still promoting differential treatment too often, with black and brown bodies versus white bodies, that any black spokesperson or leader who emerges with some power and potency has to deal with the threat of death every minute of their lives. And that's very real. And therefore, understandably, large numbers of folk become concerned, like their mama, cousin, friend, you know what I mean? Yeah. And when that occurs, then the attention given to those who are living under that kind of threat surfaces more than others who are not living and having to pay that kind of cost. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think so much of white America really don't understand why Minister Louis Farrakhan could have a certain sympathy among black folk, even the masses of black people don't join his organization. And the reason is because everybody knows that he's been demonized to such a degree that he can be shot any moment, and he has been ready to die for black people since 1959. And so anytime you come to a people who have been so hated and hunted, and he says, I love you enough that I'm going to die for you, you say, well, you know, I disagree with that Islamic stuff, and I disagree with the bow tie, and I disagree with this, but he's serious about black folk to the degree to which he's willing to pay the ultimate cost. And so there's a certain sympathy that flows, even given some very, very deep, you know, theological, philosophical, political disagreements. So what happens then, you have to then deal with the very distinctive dynamics of a group that is used to having its leaders killed at whim and murdered over and over again. You see what I mean? So at that point then, where it becomes not real just in terms of the life of an individual, but also how that individual is perceived, you see. And hence the democratic model is so very important. And here I think I do agree with Jepson brothers and sisters. But on the other hand, I know how very difficult it is to be able to pull that off in a situation in which, you know, what's coming at one is not always the same, given the role and function that one performs. You see, and that's very important, I think. Yeah, but I'm sorry to go on.
Thank you.
Yes, you can go right ahead.
Thanks a lot for hanging around and answering my question.
No, indeed. Good to see you, though, man.
Yeah, I've got another question for you about the church, and that you've talked about tonight. We've talked about the segregated church, and then again, you've also talked about whenever there's a church, a social movement in which the church is involved in, it seems to be very authoritarian.
Authoritarian.
Right, no, authoritarian.
Yes, exactly.
Well, my question is that do you feel that the church in its present state will be more effective as a tool of reconciliation between the races, between even the religions? Or do you think it would be better to be a support system for those who feel that they should go out into the front lines and make those kind of statements and movements?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. No, but I think that it has to be a combination of both, but we have to be suspicious of both for the following reason. That institutional religion, which is here to stay, tilts in a conservative direction because it's concerned with institutional perpetuation. It's concerned with the recycling of itself one generation after the next and the transmittance of its elites and so on. Yeah. And so it's here to stay. One tries to find space within it, you see. But it has never been the catalyst for any of the major social movements in our society, with rare exceptions. I mean, we need to remind ourselves, you know, as much as we were critical of communism and the Communist Party and so forth, that the Communist Party integrated itself decades before Christian churches did. You see, Paul Robeson was dancing with white brothers and sisters in 1923. Now, where were American churches in 1923? You know, 1 out of 6 of them probably hooked into the Ku Klux Klan. You know, they had work to do. They had some progress to engage in. You see what I mean? And the same is true now with the black church, owing to it being a catalyst against the struggle against white supremacy in the 50s, right, in regard to wealth inequality. Where's the discourse of wealth inequality in the black church? Where's the discourse on patriarchy in the black church? Where's the discourse on homophobia in the black church? It's tightening up. It's pulling back. You see, and the people pull back to the degree to which they're concerned with prophetic and progressive action, you see. But that doesn't mean you give up on institutional religion. You have to have a certain kind of subversive patience with institutions and people, because they are where they are. And so you push them and so on. Institutional religion has the capacity to engage in prophetic action when it's pushed in that regard. We were talking earlier today about Martin Luther King Jr. You know, we tend to think in the 1960s, he was the head Negro in charge. No, he was kicked out of the National Baptist Convention in 1961. That's the largest black organization. Wonderful, precious, loving fellow Baptists of mine. They were wrong as two left shoes. And they kicked Martin out. He had to form Progressive Baptist, which means he couldn't have been the head Negro in charge. There's other forces he had to fight against within the black community, you see, as a prophetic Christian and Democrat, small d, and in latter years actually radical Democrat that he was. But the supportive network too is very important, because our churches these days are not simply local congregations, but they're also bureaucracies. Right. You see, they have tremendous resources. And I don't believe in utilitarian uses of churches. I don't think that churches are political movements. You know, the mission of the church is to proclaim the gospel. And a consequence of a courageous proclamation of the gospel is keeping track of the least of these. So there's a crucial political dimension to it. And they can bring resources to bear owing to their understanding of the gospel to engage in political action. But there's place for political organizations. You can have Christians, non-Christians, progressives, atheists, political organizations, and they're explicitly political. They're not concerned about the gospel or nothing else. They're talking about politics explicitly. And there's a role for Christians within that context, too. Mm-hmm. Thanks so much, though. Yes, go right ahead, though.
Good evening, Dr.
Good
West.
to see you.
My name is Shannon Cantrell. I'm a senior here at the University of Richmond. And it's quite ironic that today in my education and public policy class, we embarked on a debate on integration in public schools and how in the 40 years since the Brown decision, we've actually seen a reverse effect, like in terms of the inner city schools. We've seen heightened segregation within inner city schools with more whites moving out into the suburbs and the inner cities remaining largely black. My question to you is continuing to force integration through busing and heightened efforts such as magnet school programs and charter school programs in the inner city, is this in the best interest of black America, particularly inner city America, and how does this relate to your idea for a new democracy here in America?
Yeah, well, it's tough to know, so crucial. I was encouraged in 1992 when the then candidate for presidency, Bill Clinton, was talking about massive investment of resources in education, especially in the inner cities. Because it takes resources, it takes motivated, caring teachers, it takes families and communities that serve as backdrop for young people to gain access to high-quality education. It's always not just about education, it's about schooling, relation to family, community, and the motivation of the young people themselves, you see. And what we have not seen is any serious investment of resources into those on the bottom rung of the unequal distribution of resources in American education. You see, there's, you know, large number of resources at the top. You see, the middle shrinking, the bottom just decrepit. You see, and most Americans would not send their children to schools that we confine the working poor to send their children. You see. So that we are talking about some governmental intervention. I mean, one of the reasons why I think that Bill Bradley is on to something very, very important in his race for presidency. And I think we ought to keep close track of Brother Bradley, because we need a broader discussion in the Democratic Party that goes far beyond the neoliberal orthodoxy of Clinton and Gore. Because in the end, that neoliberal orthodoxy ended up doing what? Stealing the thunder from the right wing and ended up being pushed to the right. But Clinton is now to the right of Dwight Eisenhower and thinks he's a leftist. thinks he's a progressive. Like when I was talking to him, I was saying, you know, the right-wing folk been after you for a long time, but it's not because you're so progressive. Don't fool yourself, brother. I know they're coming at you rough, but it's not because you've been so progressive. It's the culture war of the 60s still going on. Certain identifications you have, but when we look closely at your record, you've had a postage stamp approach to Republican issues, crime, violence, family, and so on, but there's no substance there that I'm calling for, you see. And that's the kind of debate that needs to take place. So we do have to acknowledge the role of politics and the role that elected officials play at the highest level, president as well as the House, as well as the Senate. But that's only one, because education is not solely about resources. Resources are necessary, but not sufficient conditions for high-quality education. You've got to have families, communities, motivated young people in place, too. And that means that we have to have jobs with a decent wage to reconstitute communities, and we've got to have deep levels of commitment to reconstitute families. And that's part of the sufficient condition. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I think we have to talk about both of those dimensions in terms of what we're going to do about the educational system, especially for working poor and very poor. And we know this also cuts across race, too. Mm-hmm. There's large numbers of white brothers and sisters who are receiving levels of education that's a disgrace for the richest nation in the history of the world. We got three more quick. Well, you want to just... Well, what we'll do is this. Let's just have three right in a row. I won't say a word. And then after, I'll say a quick word, and then we'll bring it to a close. Is that all right? Yeah. That's correct. Is that all right? Yeah, that's right. But I better write it down, though. Yeah, I got it. Yeah, go right ahead, bro.
Professor, I was inquiring about, I read in Race Matters about African-American parents sending their kids to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton instead of Howard, Spelman, and, Fisk, and Morehouse.
Morehouse and Howard.
I saw you and Professor Gates on Charlie Rose talking about the future of the race, and he mentioned that he was setting up a model based around Howard circa 40s and 50s. I was wondering, what's the possibilities of public intellectuals come out of Howard, Fisk, Morehouse, instead of, I just want to know if black intellectuals come out of black schools. And instead, because you got to say they favor certain schools just like they do with law schools and Supreme Court appointments. That's my point.
No, I appreciate that question, though, brother. We're gonna hit that head on, too. You go right ahead.
My question is concerning what you were talking about earlier, the market mentality. My question is concerning the market mentality of love, not just between a male or a female or significant others, but also between parents and children. And I want to know if love driven by materialism, and is it wrong to want material gratification for a love relationship?
I appreciate that heartfelt question, though, sister. Definitely.
Good evening, Dr. West.
How you doing there, brother?
I guess my question is, you're familiar with the recent developings of our African-American leaders who have fallen, like Henry Lyons. I guess my question is, in your opinion, what are some key elements that we as young African-Americans who plan to go back into communities, what are some things that we must avoid or look out for?
Yeah, no, indeed. Well, I'm glad we asked these questions, you see. That was all for Virginia Union right there? Oh, this brother right here. You proud of him too, aren't you? Yeah, right on. I'm proud of him too. Definitely. Black intellectuals. Well, one, we have to acknowledge that there's so many different kinds of so-called intellectuals. And there's so many different kinds of so-called public intellectuals that we shouldn't believe the hype and think that the only public intellectuals are those who are talking heads on mainstream television. That's just one context among others. In fact, in many ways, it might not even be the most important context. You got intellectuals in black schools, community colleges involved in different public struggles. They are public intellectuals of the first kind and first rate. They're just not visible. And if Exactly. Professor King. We've been at it for a long time. I mentioned before our years at Princeton going back. wrestling with crews and so forth and so on. He's been a public intellectual now for, I won't mention the years because he still looks young, but he's been at it for a long time. He's been at it for a long time. And simply because you're not on Charlie Rose every 6 months doesn't mean you're not public intellectual. You're probably doing something more important. You see what I mean? But there's different contexts and there's different forms of access. Now, you can do some positive things if you get on the Charlie Rose and try to tell the truth and so on. You can do some negative things. You get up there and just stammer and don't want to tell the truth and engage in mendacity, you see. You're just wasting space and time. But there's so many other contexts as well. There's intellectuals with the trade union movement who are public intellectuals, who are doing very important work, who may not be as visible, you see. So that for me, it's crucial that we don't become preoccupied with just those who are highly visible, you see. And of course, how long they're visible is an open question. You know, the mainstream chew you up and spit you out. You just got to keep doing what you're doing because that's what your calling is. You keep speaking your truths and so forth and so on. Brother King and I, Professor King and I, and Dr. King and I, we've been wrestling with these issues for 20-some years, right? And we had audiences of 3. Is that true? We had an audience of 3. We had our little study group at Princeton and so forth. And so now the audience is a little bit larger. Who knows how long it's going to be? You just got to do what you're called to do and be faithful unto death. That's what it's about. You see what I mean? Now, in terms of the black institutions, I think we also have to recognize that there's a tremendous burden on intellectuals who are in black institutions because these are primarily teaching institutions with tremendous teaching loads, and therefore you don't have enough time to do the research and the reading and the writing that you really want to do. It's partly because you love your students so much that you want to make contact with them, you want to have hands-on contact with them. And oftentimes, when they do very well, what do? They then go off to predominantly white institutions to get their PhDs. And you got to have folk there to pass it on. There has to be a division of labor. And you find folk moving back and forth between historically black institutions and predominantly white institutions. The question is not so much where you are, but what you're doing in each context. You got a lot of black folk who are in predominantly black institutions not doing that much. You see, they got a challenge. You got black folk in predominantly white institutions not doing that much too. They got to meet the challenge. And not only that, you got white folk in predominantly white institutions who have played a very important role for black folk. The human connection, shape and mold their conscience, take them seriously intellectually, push them and so forth and so on, you see. Richard Rorty, for example, Sheldon Wolin at Princeton. These are white brothers made a difference, a big difference, because they're serious about the life of the mind, you know what I mean? There are some other white brothers who just taking up space, but God bless them. I mean, that's the way it is across the board. That's the way it is across the board. So it's not just a matter of being obsessed with where you are, it's what you're doing, with your resources that you have. One of the things that I think the greatest legacy in many ways of historically black college and university is they've just done so much with so little. I mean, you know, how could they dish out such high quality, compassionate folk? You know what I mean? Sinclair Drake, Du Bois. You know what I mean? That's almost unprecedented in American life. You get folk, an institution that has so little and then throws out the best. What's going on? There was a whole lot of sacrifice, love, support, spend time with them to do that. That's what that is, and that's a very rich tradition. I try to learn from that tradition in the context of Cambridge. The second question about love, though, I mean, one, we want to keep in mind that love itself is a non-market value. It's the most daring, difficult, dangerous force in the world. When you fall in love, you got something that's untamable, unconsumable. You know what I mean? It's something. And you know it and I know it, you see. And this is true not just erotically, this is true in terms of friendship. When you really love a friend, it cuts all the way down to the marrow of your bones, the real depths of your soul. And you know it's not about market mentality, market calculation, philosophic calculations, about something like loyalty, trust, you see. And of course the love of a child is like that too. And the child's love for parent at its best is like that too. And part of the challenge is acknowledging the power of love and yet knowing it operates often on a personal, interpersonal level. And so we must talk about justice and democracy at the institutional and structural level. Because no matter how much we try, it's going to be very, very difficult to ever love a relative stranger as much as you love your mother. It just, you know, it's difficult. I don't think it's impossible, because some folk have trouble with their mama. So she's not a strong candidate to compare to others. But generally speaking, that's not the case. You see what I mean? So even in our talk about love, yes, it has to be linked to justice and freedom, and yes, it's forms of gratification, but it's not gratification in and of itself, but it's in service of something bigger than itself. And even love is an inadequate term to really describe the depths of a connection between persons. Last but not least, accountability, that last question. You see, the problem with Brother Henry Lyons, and we got to keep him in our prayers because he's in deep trouble. He's in deep trouble. And I believe there's pain and hurt in every human heart. I don't care who it is. And therefore, it's the grounds of sympathy and empathy, even when they did wrong. Even when they did wrong. But you didn't have mechanisms of accountability in the National Baptist Convention that allows power to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He was a very decent brother when he went in. He looked around, saw all this booty. I mean, not physically, but in terms of pecuniary, in terms of money and so forth. Y'all don't get me wrong. My mother raised me better than that now. You know I'm not talking about. But all of this money, you get the same thing in corporate America. People going in and they're concerned and so forth. And then they say, well, the Christmas bonus can be $750,000. Oh, I got a new attitude. He saw all this money floating around. He said, grab. It's a human thing. I mentioned before, greed. No mechanism of accountability. So the question is, you have to have networks. You have to have friends who tell you the truth. Henry, you're a better man than that. You're a better person than that. You didn't spend all that time in the pastorate to get caught into this trap. You can live life without those goodies, even though you can take some of them, because of course everybody wants a little bit. I'm being realistic. I'm not against some gratification and so forth and so on. I'm not a Puritan. I'm not a saint. And proud of it. Sinner that I am. I stand in judgment, you know what I mean? But you need friends, networks who will keep you accountable. Institutions, not, beyond your friendships, but especially your friends. And for me, especially my family. You see, if I can go way off track, but when my brother brings the word to me through the memory of my father who lies in the grave, but his soul is gone. Puts a lot on my mind. You know what I mean? Puts a lot on my heart and soul. Because we got a connection, like that love connection, you see. That's accountability. Old Corn, you got to watch yourself. Getting close, being seduced. I understand, brother, because I know he loves me. I know he means the best. And I've had friends like that, too. Brother Boykin Sanders and I had Jim Washington, Brother Jim Washington, towering figure. He passed a year and a half ago. He was like that, too. Jim Forbes. Y'all know Jim Forbes? The great pastor? He's like that, too. He's my friend. He keeps me accountable. James Cone is like that. Bell Hooks is like that. Corn, I see you in the Million Man March, and I'm not marching because there's too much patriarchy there. You better watch yourself. Don't fall into that trap. I say, Bell, I'm going because I think we need to focus on the brother's predicament, but I'm going to always hold up an anti-patriarchal banner wherever I go. Keep me accountable, sister. I love you, you love me. We're going to keep each other accountable. And if she decides not to go, that doesn't make her somebody who's a renegade or so forth. We just disagree, that's all. We can agree on a whole lot of other things. You see what I mean? That, to me, is the spirit of accountability. You all have been so kind. Thank you so very much. Good luck in your work. Stay strong.
We could go on all night. Let me just remind you about the reception that will be held in the hallways. Dr. West, we thank you for all that you've said, and we won't say anything else. Thanks a lot.